Let's talk about Venezuela and why it has two competing presidents. Juan Guaidó is the one recognized by dozens of countries.
¿Quién te eligió a ti?
But Nicolás Maduro is the one in charge. In parliament, the opposition parties hold a majority, but elections are coming up, and the opposition is split over whether to boycott them.
Otra cosa sería simplemente hacerle comparsa a una dictadura.
And while the politicians argue, people in Venezuela are struggling more than ever.
You can see how desperate the situation is here.
So if things are so bad, why does Maduro still hold power? What could happen if the opposition decides to sit out the elections? And why aren't there big protests anymore? For years, we've been watching Venezuela climb to the top of just about every awful index there is. Worst economy in the world, the highest murder rate, and a refugee crisis that rivals the one in Syria.
More than 5 million of its 29 million strong population have fled the country.
That's down to a combination of bad economic policy, corruption, and in the last 2 years, sanctions. And this is how hard it is for people to feed themselves. Hyperinflation has made Venezuela's currency, the bolivar, almost worthless. The minimum wage is 1.2 million bolivares a month. That's just over $1. At that rate, you'd have to work 2 months to buy a carton of eggs, and prices go up every week. It's a mess, but it wasn't always this bad. Venezuela was once the place to be in Latin America.
Caracas, the swinging city of Venezuela.
Its huge oil reserves helped build a booming economy, but over time, corruption and inequality grew, and the shine started to wear off. Enter President Hugo Chavez. His social programs were popular, but they relied on taking over businesses, controlling the currency, and high oil prices, which eventually crashed. So by the time Chavez died, his vice president, Nicolás Maduro, inherited an economy in a lot of trouble. Then 2018 happened. Maduro said he won the presidential race, but the opposition and a lot of countries disagreed.
There was no international observation. The main opposition coalition was actually barred from presenting candidates under its unified ticket.
So the opposition basically said the presidency is vacant, and according to the Constitution, the president of the parliament should take over and call new elections. That man was Juan Guaidó.
The Maduro government felt like they were being usurped. And actually, it's ironic because Juan Guaidó has referred to Nicolás Maduro as a usurper, but the other side feels the same way.
So for the last 2 years, both men have laid claim to the presidency. Most opposition parties consider Guaidó to be the acting president. He's also recognized by nearly 60 countries, including most of Latin America, the US, and the EU. And then there's Maduro, who has the backing of countries like Russia and China, and he's the real authority on the ground. He has the loyalty of the military, the National Guard, and a civilian militia. Military officials also control industries like the state oil company, and Maduro's appointees run institutions like the Supreme Court. And even though the government is nearly bankrupt, Venezuela still manages to trade with allies like Turkey and Iran. Guaidó just can't access those kinds of resources, but he does have public support, just not as much as before. In 2019, hundreds of thousands of people rallied for months, backing Guaidó.
The bulk of the opposition strategy hinged on getting the military to break away from Maduro, something that never happened.
And after nearly 50 people were killed, mostly by security forces, momentum fizzled out. Guaidó's coalition of opposition parties then tried other ways to put pressure on Maduro, and they had help from abroad. Sanctions have blocked Venezuelan oil exports. Government assets worth billions of dollars have been frozen, including Venezuelan gold in the Bank of England. Mercenaries have even tried and failed to overthrow Maduro. But after all that, Maduro is still around, and his supporters say what the opposition has been doing is evidence of an international conspiracy to remove Maduro. And here's another thing. Maduro is pretty unpopular. His disapproval rating, according to one pollster, is 77%. But Guaido's isn't far behind.
Many feel that maybe this hardline stance of Juan Guaido has not worked. These sanctions that were supposed to drive Maduro out of the Miraflores palace have not worked.
And now there are parliamentary elections. Maduro says more than 100 parties have candidates running, and he's invited foreign observers. But Guaido and some of the main opposition parties say the elections have been rigged from the start. Opposition leaders have been jailed or simply removed, and several political parties have been banned. They also say the body that runs elections is made up of people appointed by the pro-Maduro Supreme Court. So instead, Guaido and the main opposition parties are doing their own thing. They're calling on people to boycott the election in December. And in the meantime, they're holding their own referendum. It's to ask people if they approve of what Maduro's doing and if they want him gone.
Los llamamos a ustedes para que este 12 de diciembre llenemos las calles de Venezuela y decir, fuera Maduro, no al fraude.
But some just aren't convinced. They say it's better to run and try to win a seat in parliament. Either way, Maduro stands to win control of basically everything, and people who want change haven't been protesting the way they used to. They're in the middle of a pandemic, there's a state of emergency. There's also a lot of fear.
Human rights groups say that an increasing number of journalists, doctors, opposition politicians, and ordinary citizens are being detained.
So the protests may be smaller, but the anger is growing.
COVID-19 may generate fear among people, but surviving every day is the main worry for many.
People who 4 or 5 years ago were able to sustain themselves and able to get by and are reduced to just unthinkable poverty.
A lot of people also seem to have just given up. Many have lost faith in politicians, protests, and elections. Whether Juan Guaido can convince people to boycott the vote and take part in his referendum may give us an idea of just how much hope is actually left. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe, like, or follow Al Jazeera wherever you're watching this video to stay on top of world news. And I'll see you next week.